Okay, so today we are speaking to Radhika Ramesh, who works for the Good Food Institute in India. She is a policy specialist. Hello, Radhika. How are you?
Hello, hi, morning
Hello.
to you.
Would you be able to just introduce yourself a little bit and say what you do, what your role is in India?
Sure. So I've been working for the Good Food Institute India, which is an organization that focuses on developing alternative protein. We call it as smart protein in India. So we're sort of like an ecosystem enabler, a think tank, an open access scientific organization, and we're a part of an international network of nonprofits. So I work in the policy team where we work to build government awareness about the alternative protein technology, help them fit that within their national priorities, um, so that they can see it as a solution for climate action, for economic opportunities, just general, creating it as a top tier priority in terms of other areas of climate investment for the country. So we also work closely with the regulator so that we have enabling regulatory pathways when companies come up in the sector. I am trained in law, but I was always very interested in sustainability and climate change, and international trade. So I thought this was the best organization because it fills that intersection with all of the different areas that I'm passionate about.
Okay, so you're working directly with governments and with the regulator in India. Who is the regulator?
Yeah, I do. We do work with several government bodies. In India, it's sort of like a quasi-federal structure. So then you also have a central government, but because there's so many states, we also have state level government members. So we have like a multi-pronged approach where we try to engage centrally, but also in those regional governments, because each state or each region is also very vastly different, and they have different opportunities. So we try to see what would be the most unique opportunity that we can propose for that particular region. But we can speak about that more later. And the regulator in India, the food regulatory body, is called the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, which is the FSSAI. They are like a counterpart of let's say, of the US FDA. So they authorize any food product that would go into the consumer market. For a lot of the alternative protein products that are considered novel, let's say fermentation protein or cultivated protein, there is a process called pre-market approval where you first submit a dossier with all the information, and then they ascertain if the food is safe to be, safe to reach the consumer shelves. And then once you get that approval, then you can start manufacturing and producing those products.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like it's a similar process to that of the USA. How close do you think they are in India from that first stage?
So the body is a little different in the US because for cultivated meat, there's two agencies that work. But do you mean in terms of like one particular category, what the regulatory advancement in India looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose more broadly, just interested in what the take up is like. What is the attitude like there in India? Do you think they're close to accepting it? Do you think they're close to approving it?
Yeah, so we're seeing different levels of success in terms of regulatory understanding or like perception from the regulator. So for plant-based meat, because it's not really considered as novel as the other categories, there's a lot of products already on the market shelves. There's different there's different types of offerings. We're seeing a lot of startups. There's about 40 different brands. There's 29 different formats, And these are products across meat, eggs, dairy, and they're all available in retail, e-commerce, and food service channels. But when it comes to cultivated protein, what we are understanding through our advisory is that the current regulatory framework would be appropriate to regulate these novel proteins. So I think the regulator is just at this stage just waiting for the first application to go in for cultivated protein. But for fermentation, there's a company called Perfect Day, which produces dairy protein, animal-free dairy protein, and they received their approval earlier this year. So they are looking to set up manufacturing in India, and then they'll be exporting the animal-free dairy protein to other countries. So we're seeing companies like Perfect Day venturing into India because there are opportunities like low-cost manufacturing that India offers.
Okay, so and Perfect Day, where are they based then? You know,
Let me just check. Yeah, I think it's a company from the US.
Right.
I'm just
I have
confirming.
heard of
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
Yes.
yes. They're based in California. So they produce something called casein or whey protein. It's through the the precision fermentation. So it's animal free, and they felt that there would be a lot of economic sense for them to just also set their base for manufacturing in countries like in India. So they are looking at a big expansion over the next year.
Right, interesting. So it's a sort of milk alternative, is it, that they produce?
Yeah, so they're producing the same globules or the proteins that exist in let's say dairy, which is produced by cow milk, except that it's not derived from the animal, so it's animal free. It gives that mouthfeel of actually consuming an actual dairy product, because it is, but it's just produced through fermentation, precision fermentation, to be precise.
And they've been given approval by the Food Safety and Standards Authority in India, have they?
Yeah, for a pre-market approval, that's right.
Okay.
So they went through that novel process, the novel regulatory framework process. They've submitted their documents, and the regulator has authorized them, and now they can start producing.
Okay,
exporting.
Interesting. And they're the first ones to get approval in India, are they? The first,
in precision fermentation?
In regard to sort of animal alternative proteins, of any sort, not kind of plant-based, but sort of.
No, they are one of the first, in the sense that they are the first international organization to come set up in India and get that approval. But like I mentioned earlier, there have been other categories that have seen a lot more progress. There are other companies, through our advisory, we understand, are looking to or are in the process of applying for approval. So we might see way more approvals over the next year.
Right. Okay. Interesting. So, could you tell me a little bit about what are the differences in India compared to, other, other countries around the world? What are the difficulties that India might face in with the new technology involving lab-grown, protein alternatives?
Got it. I think you are referring to cultivated meat, what we call cultivated meat. So generally, the challenges for cultivated meat is that it's high investment technology, and it requires a lot of space. So it's also an area of technology that has been recently developing. So there is still a lot of R&D that's taking place. So currently in India as well, we have, I think, 1 to 3 researchers or even academic institutions working on cultivated meat, and they're looking at solving some white space opportunities or challenges, research challenges that exist across. And I think it's still in that R&D level. They are looking to commercialize or apply for approval over the next few years. I think COVID in India also sort of affected their research and development activities and just sort of their overall plan to go to the market. But the challenge, like I mentioned, is that access to funding is an issue. So the way we see it is that if the government is able to support them with public funding, then I think that's a big support that can come in for entrepreneurs, because right now they are producing it at a lab scale, and we'll need to look at for it to really be a solution that can help reduce the reliance on animal protein. There needs to be a vast amount of product that needs to be produced. So for that, we are working with the government to help them understand the need to sort of invest in this food systems transformation. And there has been development. Well, to be fair, in 2019 we worked with an institute called the Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, and they received a grant from the government's Department of Biotechnology for a joint research project to develop cultivated meat from sheep cells, which is lamb or mutton, as we call it in India. We're also working with another institute to advance R&D in cultivated seafood product, because seafood is so popular in India. So there are startups like MyoWorks and Neat Meat and Clear Meat that are working on this, but right now I don't think they're like really ready to go to the market, but we're hopeful in the next year that something positive would happen.
Okay.
So that's the challenge.
Is there anything unique about the India market, do you think? Is there something that kind of makes it more complicated or makes it easier than other markets?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the way we look at it is that there are some challenges, but then with those challenges, there are unique opportunities that innovation can tap into. So I'll start by giving you an example of what it looks like in other countries and sort of highlight the unique position of India when it comes to alternative protein. So the US, for example, is predominantly a very high animal protein consuming nation. There's a lot of reliance on red meat, right? Especially beef. Now, beef is mass produced to be sold in several formats. It could be a steak, it could be a hamburger, or a minced beef for meatballs, which all forms a very integral part of their food culture in the US. Now, recognizing this opportunities, innovators or entrepreneurs or companies have kept innovation by keeping in mind the regional preferences. So a company called Beyond Meat, it's a very popular alternative protein company that you might have heard of. Now, they've gone one step ahead in their innovation by adding beetroot extract, which is produced in-house by them. It contains a compound which basically gives consumers the feeling that they are biting into that juicy beef product with the bloodiness that you would previously only find in an animal protein product. So it literally gives you that feeling that you are not eating an alternative, but the actual animal protein product. Now, I can't say... Yes, with beetroot, which is it's legumoglobin. I can share the link with you later. It's very interesting how they produce that. It's got the color, it's got that that metallic taste that you would get. But I can't say that a similar product would be very popular across India, because there are cultural and religious reservations for that category of animal protein, beef. But there are unique tastes and preferences in India that entrepreneurs are tapping into, because by understanding the unique consumer cohort, alternative protein startups are developing the products that consumers would rather want rather than an imported idea. So, to explain further, there is a notion that India is predominantly a vegetarian nation. It's not. 77% of Indians recognize themselves as non-vegetarian. But within that segment, there are a lot of differences in how consumers eat meat, when they eat meat, when they abstain from eating meat, for example, for religious days or fasting periods. There's also certain types of animal protein that are more popular in certain regions. For instance, India has a really long coastline, so there are regions where seafood is an essential staple compared to other regions where egg might be the most popular protein. So I think these regional and cultural reasons have driven startups to produce products that are unique in Indianized formats. For example, in the form of a plant-based chicken biryani or a plant-based meat samosa or a plant-based meat dumpling, which is called a momo here, with Indian flavors and spices. So I think they're really tapping into that, consumer cohort, and it's really popular amongst the group that we call the early adopters, who are young and they're upwardly mobile. So there's been a lot of growth in the category over the last 2 years, I would say.
Okay, so yes, I mean there's a big market around the world for Indian style food and curries and that sort of thing. So do you think this will be a big market for the alternative cultured meat market in India, that they'll actually kind of tap into that area?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, once that technology develops and it's scalable and it meets that price point, we do see a lot of opportunities to supply to a global for the global demand. I think there is, like you mentioned, a lot of interest in the Indian food. So I think providing it in different formats, like you said, in curries and dishes like biryanis, I think those are all opportunities that companies will definitely tap into. I think right now they're still in the early stages of figuring out early technological sort of white space opportunities that they are investing a lot of time into. So once we're able to get further investments, whether private or public, I think we can then move to the next level of innovation where they decide how to present the different products and how to tap into a global supply. For sure, yeah.
So it'll be a company of cultured curries, perhaps. Which
yeah, maybe you never know.
Might be the future. So how is GFI influencing industry there in India? What's their sort of presence on the ground?
Yeah, so at GFI India, we are focused on locating alternative protein within the context of a developing world. So we're trying to see how we can aim alternative protein at improving the agricultural resilience through biodiversity, by diversifying the farmer incomes and driving access to nutritious food for consumers. So in India, we are seen as an ecosystem enabler or an ecosystem builder. So unlike in other countries like Israel or the US, where the startup ecosystem is fairly well established, in India, the entrepreneur has to build out the entire innovation stack to launch a product. So we try to make that process easier. So we focus on ecosystem building. So we have an innovation team that works closely with entrepreneurs, investors, corporate professionals to support capacity building and market access. But we also work with another cohort, which is to advance scientific research and talent. So we help to address some of the key foundational scientific challenges that currently exist by partnering with academic and research partners. We support the Indian scientists by facilitating funding opportunities or collaborative or international collaborative opportunities to conduct the cutting edge research that is very much required right now. A lot of the focus in India has also been to sort of support talent development, because we do see that talent is also an essential requirement for this growing industry. It's not just the technology or the product. We need people to actually be working or understanding how the technology works to actually get it kickstarted in a future ready sort of industry. So we're trying to see how we can create specialized coursework, curriculum, training programs We also have something called the India Smart Protein Innovation Challenge. It actually just launched today, and it's open for students to apply to. It's very unique because it's looking to fill the biggest gaps and white spaces that exist in the industry, and it's very popular amongst the young cohort. So they get an understanding of why food systems transformation is very important at a young age, and they understand the technological gaps, and they get that deep dive and hand-holding support from GFI. They get mentorship support from the industry, so they know what the challenges, but the opportunities are going into the sector. We also have a policy and regulatory team, that I am a part of. So through this team, we try to work with the government to drive public investment, but we also try to get them to recognize alternative protein by linking it to their national priorities. I think that's very important because, like, let's say, investments in solar technology or clean tech, we also see alternative protein as a very key pillar of governments, and it should be of national and national interest, because a lot of other nations are looking at it similarly as well. It's part of their food security plans for the next 5 or 10 years or 15 years. And we do this through something called the National Mission for Smart Protein, where we're hoping that the government looks at it as a unified effort to build all these programs into one unified approach where we bring different stakeholders, and then we can really build this up in India.
So it sounds like you've really got your hands full over there. So you are you are dealing with the government, the regulatory bodies, but also you're working with farmers, and you're working with young entrepreneurs. So does the GFI provide any sort of funding for any of the projects, or is it just sort of educational support?
Yeah, so GFI does provide funding. So there are funding opportunities that the Good Food Institute provides. I think I can share some resources after this call, but the GFI Research Grant Program is a donation that is procured from a small number of generous donors, but it's also a funding program which funds open access research. So I think it's on a yearly basis where you can apply for research funding. So that is something that we do as well. So but anything that comes out is open access.
Right. Okay. And when you say open access, that means it's kind of perfectly visible for everyone to see what's going on. Yes.
Yeah.
So what are the what kind of amounts are you giving to people? What is the sort of funding level?
Got it. So I think according to the GFI Research Grant Program, there's 2 types of funding mechanisms, and I think there's one field catalyst grant, which I think the grant period is up to 24 months, and it goes up to like $250,000. And the other one is a discovery grant, which is $100,000. And like I mentioned, I think they roll it out in an annual basis.
Right. Okay. That's very interesting. It's interesting to see the reach that the GFI has around the world, because they are in quite a few countries now, and they are providing a lot of assistance and a lot of funding and a lot of education. So they are, and so they are being, they are quite a big player in the industry.
Yeah, I think so. We are an international network of nonprofits, but we work independently, although we do share information, and we sort of handhold each region through this process. So there's a lot of just ensuring that we share best practices across regions. But we have colleagues that work from Brazil, Israel, the US, Europe, in Asia Pacific, and also in India. And yes, you are right. We sort of work in those different areas, but I think as a non-profit organization, and because our work is pro bono, we don't really charge for our consultancy. We also are a very unbiased organization, so we also look at the challenges faced by the sector, but we can approach the government in a manner that that they're able to reliably trust the information that we share with them, which is coming from that middle, like from a middle perspective. It's not it's very honest. Even our reports are very much giving you an overview of what the industry looks like, what the sector looks like, and what is needed for the sector to grow. And we're very much in the in this industry to ensure that the reliance on animal protein is reduced, and that's our theory of change, that it can be solved through alternative protein.
Okay, it's very interesting. The impacts of the GFI. I know that they've had quite an influence in the UK as well, sort of lobbying for kind of government funding and government education. I was just wondering, in India, what do you think is the attitude? What do you think the attitude of the person, the average person, will be to cultured meat? I know that in Europe and in England, when you mention cultured meat, there's a sort of, people screw up their face. They don't really like the idea of it. Do you think that's going to be a problem in India as well?
Yeah, I know that we spoke about this earlier about consumer acceptability, and I think that's largely also because of how any new technology is communicated to the general public, because it's always seen as very futuristic, and it's very sci-fi related. And I think it's really about how you portray your product and how you can break it down so an average rational consumer can understand the process through which that technology was made. So I think once that hurdle is crossed over, I think it's very easy for consumers to understand that this is the same. And actually, the earlier process of consuming animal protein would have been way more complex and not something that they want to continue engaging in the future, because this process of consuming it or producing it just makes more sense. So there was a consumer study where we studied the consumer acceptance of cultivated meat in countries like the US, China, and in India. And we found that 56% of Indian consumers were very likely or extremely likely to purchase cultivated meat. So I think there is interest. I think once you, like I was mentioning earlier, once you produce it in formats and in ways that people are comfortable, then I think it'll be easier for them to adopt this technology.
Okay.
It's not easy to say how fast or how soon, but we're hopeful that it'll happen soon.
I suppose, and I might be wrong here, but I get the feeling that in India it's a more maybe educated, kind of wealthier class of Indians who are eating meat. Perhaps the sort of poorest people in India don't really eat meat very much. Is that true?
So we are studying how we can ensure a just transition when it comes to the issues with respect to food security or protein malnutrition, which is a big issue in India. So right now, we do see that a lot of the let's say the richer cohorts, they are able to change their consumption lifestyle because they just have access to better resources, and they tend to make choices that can resonate with sustainability, for instance, which the other sections of society might not have an option to, because right now poultry or chicken is it's not as expensive as the other types of meat. So it's quick and efficient protein. So it is cheaper in that sense. So they have access to it, and then it fulfills their protein requirements. So no, not really. I think it really depends. There's like I said earlier, we have a really long coastline. So there's a lot of population that depends on seafood or the fisher folk, because it's part of their employment or their economic opportunities. They also imbibe it within their lifestyle or eating. So when we look at a protein transformation, we have to look at all of these aspects and how it might bring about a change in their everyday life.
Okay, that's very interesting. One last question. What do you think? What do you think is going to be? Do you think there's going to be any difficulties in India regarding sort of religion and cultured meats? I know obviously there are sort of restrictions to people's diet because of their belief. Do you think this is going to impact on cultured meat?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something that we've been studying a lot as well. And I think it's not unique to India; it's unique to a lot of countries. For instance, the Middle East, or let's say even Israel or India, where there are cultural beliefs when it comes to eating meat. And I think in India, it's also a little different, because in India there's cohorts that eat meat on certain days of the week. We are severely protein deficient, but it's also not the entire meal which is meat. It's part of the meal. Certain meats are not accepted in some religions. For example, beef is not eaten by many Hindus, or pork is not consumed by people practicing Islam, and no meat is allowed in certain communities. I think with consumer awareness about how the technology is produced, I think that will have a great impact in how people perceive the technology. But we're also looking to see how, let's say, cultivated meat can potentially get these religious certifications. So if there's a cultivated meat product, how will it get religiously certified as a halal product? And then that halal certification is very important in countries like Singapore or the Middle East, any country in the Middle East that will be either producing it locally or importing it. So I think there's a lot of bodies that are already researching it and looking at how they can make the whole process, or part of the process that's important to determine if a product is safe to consume for that cultural group or a religious group. So I think there's a lot of advancements already, and I think it's very interesting how once you're able to provide that certification, then there's that comfort in eating that particular cultivated protein.
Yes, well, there's certainly a lot to watch out for. There's going to be big change over the next year or two. And thank you very much for talking on this meeting, Radhika.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been great to meet you. And perhaps in the future we can get you back on when, if there's been something to report from India.
Sure. That sounds like a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me stop the recording.